In a forgotten town steeped in prejudice, a 28-year-old black woman, orphaned and living with her grandmother, desperately fights to sustain a decaying shelter for abandoned, disabled children. One fateful day, at a dilapidated gas station, she encounters a tattooed biker, stranded on his journey home to care for his ailing mother. Accused by the locals of attempting a scam because he can't pay by phone, she ignores their sneers, quietly covers his fuel, and departs. 3 days later, the Hells Angels roll back, bearing a gift that will irrevocably alter the town. Before we plunge into this tale, let us know where you're watching from. We genuinely value your thoughts. The town of Plainwood huddled at the edge of desolation, a place the world seemed to deliberately forget. Cracked asphalt veins snaked between lonely gas stations and hollowed-out diners. Sun-bleached signs, tattered and faded, clung to rusted poles, whispering of businesses long dead. Crooked windows held dusty, drooping curtains, and yards of brittle, defeated grass surrendered to decay. It was a place where people remained, not by choice, but by circumstance, a town where hope had seemingly taken flight. That morning, the sky hung a dull, oppressive gray, pregnant with clouds that mirrored the town's weary spirit. Even the sun seemed to flinch from shining on Plainwood. At the corner gas station, a small cluster of locals idled by the convenience store. Their voices were hushed, their gazes razor-sharp, their stares lingering with quiet suspicion. There was no urgency here. Time itself seemed sluggish. Instead, they stood, steaming coffee cups in hand, trading tired stories, complaints, and furtive, sidelong glances laced with judgment. The moment she appeared, they noticed her. Alicia, 28, black. Her dark, luminous skin stood in stark contrast to Plainwood's faded canvas. Her frame was tall, slender, imbued with the quiet resilience of someone accustomed to carrying invisible burdens and walking endless miles. Her hair, a cascade of tight, black curls, was drawn into a practical, neat bun. Her attire was unpretentious: old jeans, worn sneakers, a plain gray t-shirt. In her hands, a small stack of flyers, their edges softly curled, the black ink blurring from countless rejections. The bold words at the top declared, "Hope Haven, shelter for abandoned and disabled children. We need your help." It wasn't her first trek down these streets, and she knew it wouldn't be her last. Yet, each time, the looks remained the same. Always got her nose in other people's business, one man grumbled, barely bothering to lower his voice as she passed. She should focus on taking care of her own, an older woman added, clutching her purse tighter. A teenage boy on a rusted bike snorted, "Don't know why she stays here. Ain't nobody wanting her. Or that old dump she's begging for." Alicia absorbed every word. She always did. But she kept moving, her eyes fixed forward, her steps unwavering. She hadn't just grown up in this town, she'd forged her survival within it. Orphaned at 8, she'd been shunted between distant relatives and threadbare couches until her grandmother, sweet, stubborn Miss Edna, took her in. Their small, creaky house on the town's edge, with its leaky pipes and peeling paint, was her sanctuary. Miss Edna had instilled 2 truths in her: never apologize for who you are and always fight for those with no voice. Now, that fight was Hope Haven. The old shelter, its faded blue paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its walls cracked and weary, crouched near the woods. It sheltered children no one else wanted: the abandoned, the disabled, the forgotten. Donations were a trickle, volunteers a myth. No one paid heed to a rundown shelter on the outskirts, run by a black woman in a predominantly white town. But Alicia did, because someone had to. The flyers were her latest desperate gambit, printed with her last scraps of money, a desperate plea to ignite a flicker of compassion in the hearts of those who routinely crossed the street to avoid her. As she passed the diner, more eyes tracked her, whispers drifting like smoke. Some regarded her with distrust, others with quiet annoyance, a few with outright contempt. It wasn't new, not surprising, but it still burned. Alicia gripped the flyers tighter, her heartbeat steady, her jaw set. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here for those kids, those tiny, forgotten lives who deserved so much more than this broken town. She couldn't know it yet, but fate was about to deliver aid from a place even more improbable than the kindness buried beneath Plainwood's cold, hard streets. The gas station, a study in decay, seemed even older up close. Faded yellow paint peeled from its wooden siding, and the flickering sign above the small store waged a losing battle for existence. The fuel pumps, rusted relics with clicking analog dials, belonged to a bygone era. Alicia parked her old, dented sedan, a veteran of better days, at the farthest pump, flyers tucked under her arm. The air hung heavy with the scent of oil, hot asphalt, and dust, laced with a sharp tang of cigarette smoke from the cluster by the ice machine. She didn't need to look to feel their eyes. She was accustomed to that pervasive gaze. This wasn't downtown, where people were too preoccupied to care. This was Plainwood's fringe, and out here, being black, being different, meant being watched. As her hand reached for the pump, voices sliced through the low hum. "What's your problem, man? You think you can just roll in here and get gas for free?" Alicia's gaze snapped to the commotion near the first pump. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood beside a massive motorcycle, its chrome glinting under the anemic sunlight. The faded emblem on his worn leather jacket proclaimed Hell's Angels, a symbol that commanded attention. His arms were a canvas of dark, snaking tattoos. His face was etched with the rough edges of a life lived hard. The station attendant, a short, red-faced man in his 40s, jabbed a finger aggressively, his voice loud enough to draw glances from the loafers nearby. "You people always think you can pull some stunt," the attendant sneered. "Bet you've got a record as long as my arm. You think, 'cause you ride a fancy bike, you can weasel your way out of paying." Alicia paused, her hand still on the gas pump, her eyes narrowing. The others, the coffee drinkers, the tired mechanic, the woman on her phone, watched with smug amusement. No one intervened. Some even chuckled softly, whispering, eager for the spectacle to unfold. The man by the bike raised his hands, palms open, his voice calm but strained. "Look, I'm not trying to cheat anybody. I didn't realize this place only takes cash." Yeah, I've heard it all before," the attendant cut him off, stepping closer. "You bikers think rules don't apply to you. Well, not here." Alicia observed the man's jaw tighten, his eyes flickering with frustration, yet he maintained a striking composure. She saw it in the squaring of his shoulders, the quiet, practiced restraint of someone perpetually misunderstood, perhaps even judged on sight. The crowd shifted, some pulling out phones, ready to film, not to help. The man tried again, slower this time. "My mom, she's sick. I'm heading back to see her. I spent what cash I had helping a kid I ran into on the road. I figured this place would take mobile pay." "You figured wrong," the attendant snapped. "Ain't my problem. You don't have cash, you don't get gas. Simple." He reached for his phone. "Or I can call the cops, and they'll be happy to explain it to you." Alicia's pulse quickened. The man wasn't threatening, wasn't yelling, but it made no difference here. His tattoos, his jacket, his bike, they had already condemned him in their eyes. She knew that feeling intimately. The whispers reignited. Someone muttered, "Call the cops already." Another snickered, "Bet he's got drugs in that thing." Alicia clenched her jaw. Her eyes swept across the crowd, smirks, folded arms, self-satisfied faces. No one offered help. No one cared about the truth. Just a group of people too eager to play jury, judge, and executioner. She could have looked away, fueled her car, and driven off. Let it be someone else's problem. But she knew better. She understood the weight of good people staying silent. Before a second thought could surface, Alicia stepped forward, her voice cutting cleanly through the air. "I'll pay for his gas." The words landed heavy in the sudden silence. The attendant froze. The man by the bike turned towards her, surprise flickering across his face. The crowd reacted first, a chorus of laughter, disbelief, even mockery. "You serious?" the attendant scoffed. "You don't even know this guy." "That's right," Alicia shot back, her voice unwavering. "I don't, but I know when someone's being treated like garbage for no good reason." The woman with the phone laughed, shaking her head. Guess trouble attracts trouble. Alicia ignored her, striding past the gawkers to the register. She pulled out her worn wallet, thumbing through the few bills she possessed. Money earmarked for flyers, perhaps a meager meal for the shelter, now gone. But some things simply mattered more. She paid for both her gas and his. No hesitation, no regret. As the receipt printed, the attendant muttered, "Your money, your mistake." Alicia pocketed the receipt, her gaze unyielding. The only mistake is thinking cruelty makes you right. The crowd's amusement dissolved as they realized the confrontation was over. One by one, they drifted back to their cars, their coffee, their whispered judgments. The man approached her, his boots heavy on the cracked pavement. Up close, his eyes were steel gray, sharp, but not unkind. He opened his mouth, words catching before he found them. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel. "I know," Alicia replied simply. He extended his hand. "At least let me pay you back, or buy you a meal." Alicia shook her head, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "Don't worry about it." Before he could protest, a gust of wind caught one of her flyers from the open car door. It tumbled across the pavement, landing at his feet. He bent, picking it up, his eyes scanning the words, "Hope Haven, Shelter." His brow furrowed, curiosity blooming behind the hard edges of his expression. Alicia was already moving, sliding back into her car, the engine sputtering to life. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Some acts of kindness weren't meant to be repaid, but sometimes they planted seeds where you least expected them. It had been 3 days since that morning at the gas station, but the memory remained razor-sharp in Alicia's mind. She hadn't expected to see him again, the man with the tattoos, the heavy boots, those steel-gray eyes. Just another stranger passing through Plainwood, caught in the town's relentless web of judgment. 3 days of walking dusty streets, handing out flyers that most people simply ignored. 3 days of forced smiles and polite no thank yous. The shelter still clung by a thread, the roof still wept when it rained, and Hope Haven remained invisible to the world. The late afternoon sun cast long, weary shadows across the cracked driveway as Alicia sat on the front steps, elbows resting on her knees, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Inside, the children had finished dinner, their laughter a faint echo through the old walls. Miss Edna was sorting donations, a small box of canned goods from the church, barely enough to last a week. Alicia closed her eyes for a second, the overwhelming weight of it all pressing down, as it always did. Then she heard it, the deep, steady rumble of engines rolling up the road. Her eyes snapped open. A cloud of dust billowed beyond the shelter's faded sign as a line of motorcycles materialized, their chrome catching the evening light. A dozen, perhaps more, riding slow and deliberate up the driveway, as if laying claim to the very road. For a moment, Alicia was frozen. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the bikes halted, engines growling low before cutting off one by one. The air settled into a heavy, watchful silence. And then she saw him, the man from the gas station, helmet tucked under one arm, dark hair pulled back, broad shoulders encased in a worn leather jacket bearing that unmistakable patch, Hell's Angels. His steel-gray eyes found hers instantly. Alicia's mouth went dry. She hadn't expected him. She hadn't expected any of this. Miss Edna stepped onto the porch beside her, knitting forgotten in her hands. What in the world? The other bikers dismounted, tall, tattooed, clad in worn jeans and leather vests. They looked rough, even dangerous, but their eyes held no malice. They watched quietly, an underlying curiosity in their gaze. The man walked towards her, his boots heavy on the gravel, stopping a few feet away. He pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it up. It was her flyer. "You dropped this," he said simply. Alicia stared at the crumpled paper, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes flicked from the flyer to his face, then to the row of motorcycles and the men behind him. "I didn't think." She trailed off, her voice unsteady. "How did you even?" He offered a faint smile. "You left in a hurry. Guess it caught the wind." His gaze drifted to the shelter behind her. "Hope Haven. You run this place." Alicia hesitated, still trying to grasp the surreal scene. Yeah, I do. The man nodded, his expression softening, the tension in his broad frame easing. Name's Jake. Jake Rivers. He gestured to the bikers behind him. That's my crew. Some of 'em call me Broken Wing. Long story. Miss Edna emitted a low hum of suspicion beside her, but Alicia raised a hand, her eyes still locked on Jake. You tracked me down because of a flyer? She asked. Confusion lacing every word. Jake's smile held a brief, sad quality. I tracked you down because 3 days ago, when no one else gave a damn, you did. Alicia swallowed hard, her pulse still racing. Jake continued, his voice low but steady. That morning, I was on my way back home. My mama, she's been sick a long time. Hospital bills, treatments, the whole nightmare. He paused, something flickering behind his eyes. I took the back roads, stayed off the main highway. Didn't want trouble, didn't want attention. Figured Plainwood would be quiet. His jaw clenched for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough around the edges. Ran out of gas. Dumb mistake. Gave my last cash to a homeless kid a few towns back. Guess I figured people'd be decent at the gas station. His eyes met hers. I figured wrong. Alicia's stomach tightened. The memory of that scene at the station replayed vividly. The shouting, the cruel looks, the threat of police. Jake tilted his head. But you didn't turn your back. You paid for a stranger. You didn't even want thanks. He held up the flyer again. But you did want help. Alicia looked at the worn edges of the flyer, the bold black letters, the shelter's name. Her fingers ached to take it from him, but she remained still. Jake glanced at the shelter, then back at her. I figured maybe it's time someone actually showed up. Behind him, the other bikers opened the back of a pickup truck. Boxes of food, medical supplies, toys, all neatly packed, stacked high. Alicia's throat tightened. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was speechless. Jake shoved his free hand into his pocket, suddenly looking almost sheepish. I get it. We look rough. People cross the street when they see us. But the way I see it, broken people help broken places. Alicia studied him, his tired eyes, the scars on his knuckles, the quiet, stubborn weight in his voice. Miss Edna finally spoke, her voice sharp but curious. And you're just here to help. Out of the blue. Jake shrugged. Call it karma. Call it payback. Call it whatever makes it sit right with you. He locked eyes with Alicia again. But I don't forget when someone saves my ass. The wind stirred the flyer in his hand, its edges fluttering gently between them. Alicia reached out, her fingers brushing the paper, her voice finally steady. Guess Hope Haven's about to get a little louder. Jake's lips curved into a quiet, knowing smile. Guess so. And for the first time in days, Alicia wasn't carrying the weight alone. The low, steady roar of engines echoed down the empty streets of Plainwood long before anyone saw them. It began as a hum on the horizon, a distant growl that rolled over cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts like a warning or a promise, depending on who listened. Old men at the diner looked up from their coffee, squinting toward the main road. A woman at the corner store paused mid-sentence on her phone, a familiar unease creeping across her face. Children peered from behind screen doors, eyes wide. And then they came. Motorcycles, dozens of them. Shining chrome caught the late morning sun. Black leather jackets creaked as riders leaned into slow, deliberate turns. Behind the bikes, 2 pickup trucks rumbled, their beds piled high with crates and supplies. The bold, unmistakable patch on their backs, Hell's Angels. The townspeople froze. Conversations died mid-word. Coffee cups hung suspended. Judgment sharpened like knives behind narrowed eyes. They're back, someone muttered. Trouble, another whispered. Somebody better call the sheriff. But no one moved. Because curiosity, it turned out, was stronger than fear. And Plainwood thrived on watching things unravel. The convoy didn't pause at the gas station. It didn't circle back to the bars or the rundown motel. It moved relentlessly down the main road, past the diner, past the whispering crowds, past the weary stares, heading for the forgotten edge of town, heading for Hope Haven. Alicia stood at the front gate of the shelter, arms crossed over her chest, as the line of bikes pulled into the cracked gravel lot. Dust curled around the tires as engines silenced one by one. It felt different this time, less like a warning, more like a statement. Jake Rivers swung off his bike, helmet tucked under one arm, his steel gray eyes steady as they met hers. "Hope we're not late," he said with that quiet, rough-edged smile. Alicia's lips twitched despite herself. "Looks like you brought the whole county with you." The bikers moved in silent synchronicity, unloading crates from the trucks, food, clothes, blankets, medicine, essentials the shelter had desperately needed for months, but could never afford. The children peeked through the windows, their eyes wide with wonder. Miss Edna hovered on the porch, cane in hand, her sharp eyes tracking every movement like a hawk. And then the townspeople came. Not close, not bold, but they came. First, the old men from the diner, walking slowly down the sidewalk, brows furrowed, suspicion etched across their faces. Then, the woman from the corner store, arms folded tight, lips pursed. A few teenagers on bikes lingered near the edge of the lot, watching, whispering. Alicia felt their eyes, not just on the bikers, but on her. The same eyes that had followed her every step through town, heavy with doubt, coated in quiet judgment. But now, those eyes weren't filled with contempt. They were filled with confusion, curiosity, because what they witnessed didn't fit their pre-written stories. They saw rough men in leather vests and tattooed arms unloading food, handing out toys, repairing the broken porch railing. They saw Jake speaking to Miss Edna with quiet respect, saw him smile gently at the children, ruffle the hair of a shy little boy in a wheelchair. They saw Alicia standing at the center of it all, not the troublemaker, not the outcast, not the naive girl wasting her time, but the woman who had somehow accomplished what no one else dared. She had united them. She had changed the narrative. Jake walked back over, brushing dust from his hands. "They watching?" he asked, nodding subtly toward the growing crowd by the sidewalk. Alicia's lips curled. "Looks like we're a circus." Jake chuckled. "Good. Let 'em stare. Maybe they'll learn something." She glanced at the faces, the doubt beginning to crack, the curiosity simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Miss Edna leaned over, her voice low but warm. "Well, sweetheart, you sure know how to stir up a town." Alicia let out a quiet breath, the weight on her chest lifting just a little. For once, the judgment wasn't the loudest thing in Plainwood. For once, the town didn't look away. And for the first time, she wasn't standing alone. The late summer air carried the faint hum of cicadas as the sun dipped low behind the treeline, casting a soft orange glow across Plainwood. The cracked roads still wound their way through the forgotten edges of town, but they looked different now. Not new, not fixed, but transformed. People walked slower past the old gas station these days. They nodded at strangers. They hesitated before judging. And at the edge of town, where the woods pressed against broken fences, where most folks used to pretend nothing existed, Hope Haven stood taller than it had in years. The faded blue paint was gone, replaced by a fresh coat that caught the evening light like a promise. The porch railing was sturdy, the roof no longer sagged with rot, and the crooked old sign out front now gleamed with bold new letters, Hope Haven, a place for every child. Alicia stood by the front steps, arms folded loosely across her chest, watching as the last few volunteers packed up from the day's work. Her jeans were streaked with paint, her t-shirt clung to her skin with sweat and dust. But she didn't care. Because for the first time since she could remember, it wasn't just her and Miss Edna holding this place together with stubbornness and scraped knuckles. It was all of them. The townspeople, the volunteers from neighboring cities, the bikers. Jake leaned against the porch post, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. His steel gray eyes quietly observed the scene, the edges of his mouth pulled into a faint, satisfied smile. "You ever slow down?" he asked, nodding toward the stack of donation boxes by the door. Alicia shrugged, a small smirk playing at her lips. "You ever stop writing?" Jake chuckled, tucking the rag into his back pocket. His leather vest was slung over one of the porch chairs, the familiar Hell's Angels patch catching the golden light. It had been months since that first day he showed up with his crew and a truckload of supplies. Months of work, of sweat, of slowly chipping away at walls, both physical and those built from years of judgment. The town had watched, wary at first, whispered, doubted, crossed the street. But time, it turns out, has a way of unraveling even the tightest knots of fear. They saw Jake fixing the roof with his bare hands. They saw his brothers repairing broken bikes for the kids, rebuilding the old fence, stacking food in the shelter's pantry. They saw Alicia, always there, always steady, the girl they once dismissed, standing shoulder to shoulder with the very people they'd whispered about for years. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, they weren't just working. Tonight, the town came to say thank you. Across the driveway, folding chairs lined the grass as neighbors, shopkeepers, teachers, and families gathered. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't flashy. But for Plainwood, it was something close to a miracle. A small stage stood at the center, decorated with hand-painted signs and strings of old Christmas lights. It wasn't much, but it sparkled in the growing dusk. Miss Edna appeared beside Alicia, her cane tapping gently on the porch, a rare smile softening the sharp lines of her face. "They're waiting on you, girl," she said, nodding toward the crowd. Alicia's throat tightened. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't expected it. But as the sun sank lower and the porch lights flickered on, she realized maybe it wasn't about what she expected. She walked toward the stage, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The crowd parted for her, the same people who used to cross the street when they saw her coming. Now they stepped aside, not in fear, but in respect. The mayor, a gray-haired man who once avoided eye contact with her, stood by the microphone, his voice warm but uncertain as he spoke. "Tonight, we want to recognize someone who reminds us that this town's got more heart than we sometimes show." He cleared his throat. Someone who fights for the forgotten, stands up when it's hard, and proves that where you come from, what you look like, doesn't decide the size of your heart. Alicia swallowed hard as the applause rose, hesitant at first, then growing, filling the space with quiet thunder. Jake stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, watching her with a small, proud smile. The mayor handed her a small plaque, wooden, plain, but etched with careful words, "Alicia Bennett, for courage, compassion, and the heart of Hope Haven." She took it with trembling hands, the weight of it pressing against every scar the town had carved into her over the years. But tonight, they weren't scars, they were proof. She looked at the crowd, at the children smiling by the steps, at Miss Edna, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. Her gaze drifted to Jake, to the bikers leaning against their bikes, rough and ready, their presence a quiet shield around her. Alicia raised the plaque slightly, her voice clear and steady. "This isn't about me," she said, her eyes shining. "It's about them." She gestured toward the kids, toward the shelter. "And it's about choosing to see past the labels, the skin, the patches, the fear." She let the words settle, the quiet hum of understanding weaving through the crowd. "Hope isn't a building," she added softly. "It's what happens when people who aren't supposed to care show up anyway." The applause returned, louder this time. Raw with something Plainwood had long forgotten how to give: acceptance. Respect. Jake's eyes met hers across the crowd. And for once, Alicia let herself believe what she never thought possible. This place, the broken streets, the weary eyes, the tired whispers, it wasn't perfect. It never would be. But tonight, under the flickering porch lights and the hum of motorcycles waiting quietly in the dark, Plainwood felt a little less cold, and Hope Haven wasn't invisible anymore. Not to them, not to anyone. And for the first time in her life, Alicia Bennett wasn't just tolerated. She was seen. She was home. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.